Welcome to Books on Point. So what happens when South Africa's tumultuous political life becomes entangled in the courts of law? Throughout the past 50 years, the courts have been a battleground for contesting political forces as more and more conflicts that were once fought in parliament or in streets or through strikes and media campaigns find their way to the judiciary. Certainly, the legal system was used by both the apartheid state and its opponents, but it's in the post-apartheid era that we have witnessed a dramatic increase in lawfare. And to talk about that, we're joined by Michelle Roux, who is the co-author of a new book titled Lawfare, Judging Politics in South Africa, which she co-authored with Judge Dennis Davis. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having me.
So let's talk about the word lawfare, because when I first saw it, I was like, okay, this could be a very heavy book. And then as you read the chapters, it becomes a little more simple. And I was like, I like the way that this book is written and the structure in which it's written. But before we get to that, let's talk about the title Lawfare. What does it mean?
So lawfare, the idea of lawfare is that when politics has failed, so where political issues that you're trying to fight in parliament or in the streets or in civil society organizations, where those have run out, where institutions of state, like the Chapter 9 institutions, where those have run out politically, we displace those issues into the courts. So you see litigation being the place where those issues are contested. So rather than taking them up in the streets or lobbying parliament or going to a Chapter 9, we litigate about them, we turn them into lawsuits. And that's the idea of lawfare, that what you would have got traditionally through warfare, you now do through lawfare. So you use the law as this tool to try to get what you want politically.
So let's talk about your relationship with Judge Dennis Davis, because this is not the first time the two of you have co-authored a book. Let's talk about this particular one. What prompted the idea, like, let's work together and write this?
So we wrote a book that came out in 2008, but unfortunately it was seen as more of a legal textbook, so no one really read it. So what we thought was, let's take some of that material and use it again for this book, because what we are trying to do is tell the stories of some of the important cases under apartheid and then under the Constitution, because the reason we all watch TV programs with lawyers is because each episode is a story and you learn something about that issue. So in the book, what we do is each chapter we try to tell the story of some case that hopefully people would have heard of, but maybe they didn't know what was at stake, what exactly was going on. And we try to tell the story of the lawyers involved, the clients, the judges, how the press were covering it at the time, to try to give you a bit of that insider's view to how this litigation works. And then at the same time, without jargon, without legalese, to try to explain what law is doing in those cases. What does it show you about how law can be used or abused?
Yeah. The one thing I must say that I loved about the book is that, as I mentioned in the intro, that it wasn't a very heavy book to read, but you also get the opportunity to go back in the past to the 1950s and get a sense of the judges that existed back then. And we've got some visuals that are rolling on screen. And this particular one is where we have, Jacob Zuma, and he's in court. But you also highlight a lot of the cases for instance, when it comes to colored people and their voting rights. And then how did you come to the cases? How did you decide on the cases? Because I can imagine there were a lot that probably stood out to you as well.
Of course. I mean, there are hundreds of cases that we couldn't deal with in the book. So we tried to choose cases where literally the country held its breath, waiting to see what would happen in this case. And also where they showed you something about law. So the coloured vote cases are a fascinating series of cases that we had where the apartheid government was trying to remove coloureds from the voters' roll. And it was a series of cases that they took up. And initially the government lost. But then in response to that, they did two things. The first is they packed the court. So they expanded the number of judges from 5 to 11, and the 6 that they appointed were, dependable judges that would do what the government wanted. And then they changed the law so that Parliament would be able to be essentially the highest court in the land. So what we wanted to show was that where politics and other arenas aren't working, where Parliament isn't doing its bit, or political parties aren't really capturing the will of the people, and you return to the courts, what you end up doing is isolating the courts. And the courts can't do it alone. They'll be isolated, they'll be removed from society, and eventually the government will turn on the judiciary because they're holding power accountable. And eventually you see in the coloured vote case example, where eventually the courts were collapsed, they were reduced so that they couldn't hold power accountable anymore, and they gave in and did what the government wanted, and the coloureds were removed from the voters' roll.
Right. So one of the things that we notice about the new dawn of democracy was, of course, the Constitution and the role that it played. And it basically outlines various responsibilities that I suppose the state, Parliament, and how we all should interact with each other, especially when it comes to equality and equal opportunities. But the one thing we are noticing is that for some reason, the Constitution has become the big focus, where there's criticism that's been drawn to it with regards to some of the things we've not managed to achieve over the past 20-something years of democracy. Talk to me about some of the, perhaps even your thoughts around this attack that we're seeing on the Constitution.
So obviously, Judge Davis and I are constitutionists. We believe in the Constitution, we believe in upholding it. We, in the book, try to deal with some of the attacks that have been made on it and respond to them. And I think the first response would be to say the Constitution is being used as a scapegoat. It's an excuse. You know, the reason why land reform or land restitution hasn't happened in the country, the reason why children are drowning in pit latrines at schools, or, you know, go through and they don't have teachers, and when they finish the year they can't pass exams, it's not because of the Constitution. So the words on the page are not the problem. It's how we've implemented that, how we've, you know, how we've taken forward the policies and the vision in the Constitution. And quite frankly, you know, we're quite scathing. You know, we just haven't done enough to realize the vision of the Constitution. But it's about recognizing that the words on the page aren't going to feed anybody. They're not going to, without more, just lift society into the vision that it describes of an equal, dignified, transformed society. So what we try to show is how the Constitution, it's an easy target, but it's not actually the problem. I heard the Constitution described quite vividly the other day, where someone said it's a crime scene cover-up. You know, it's seen as this compromise, this deal that was done at the end of apartheid to maintain the status quo. But the reason why we haven't seen the transformation that we need is not because of the Constitution. It's, again, the failure of politics, or the limitations of our politics, that we haven't transformed as rapidly as we need to.
Yeah. What do you want the listener, well, the viewer, to get out of this book?
I think two things. The one would be if they read it and see those cases and learn that history. But the second thing would be to see the lessons in those cases and the wisdom that we get out of those cases, and then try to bring that forward and say, okay, now I know the limits of just taking it to court. What the book is actually saying is that we need to renew politics in this country, whether that's through looking at our electoral system and the role of political parties, rejuvenating civil society, getting people more engaged and active as citizens. What I think we're trying to say is that law plays a very modest part, and we shouldn't let it play the only part. It shouldn't be, you know, as a lawyer, I love the work that I do in the cases, but it shouldn't be left up to the courts alone. That we need to be looking at reinvigorating all of the other parts of our constitutional state.
All right, Michelle, thank you so much for your time. Well, we move to the next part of my segment, which is the book that I actually recommend. It is from personal finance author Robert Kiyosaki, who wrote the best-selling Rich Dad, Poor Dad 20 years ago. And he's released a new book. It's titled Fake, where he explores the ideas of fake money, fake teachers, and fake assets. He attempts to challenge wisdom and asserts that lies are making the poor and middle class poorer. Robert pulls no punches in this assessment of what he's passed off as fact. That said, this newest book can get a little bit repetitive, I must admit. While the book incorporates current events up to last year, many stories from previous Rich Dad books are rehatched. Still, it's worth reading, and you can decide where you stand with regards to his argument. And of course, it's the final day of the annual Africa Development Bank Group, so we're going to switch things up a little bit. And the meetings happened in Malabo at Equatorial Guinea, but more than 3,000 African and international dignitaries have participated in the meetings. Let's get the latest from Nzinga Kuta about more on that.
A very good afternoon to you, Nastasia, and to our viewers. It's the final day of the Africa Group Development Bank meetings that are taking place in Malabo, Equatorial Guinea. The financial statement presented by the bank said that their revenue was from 2010 was about 2.5 billion US dollars. The bank saying that they have the strongest rating, AAA rating that's taking place. They've got the strongest AAA rating in the world, and they're encouraging African countries to come to them to get money, saying that they could save as much as $1 billion in a 20-year loan if they go to the African Development Bank rather than going to the Eurobond market in order to secure funds for the projects that they're doing. We've just seen the closing ceremony where a minister from Equatorial Guinea is pleading with people to come to the country. We know that there are lots of issues around Equatorial Guinea, especially when it comes to human rights. Technically, they are the richest country on the African continent when it comes to per capita GDP, but we know that human rights reports often say that that money doesn't trickle down, and perhaps it's filtered to other places. So the minister there encouraging people to come. The African Bank Development President Dr. Akinwum Adesina saying that for him it's one of the best events that the group has held here in Malabo, Equatorial Guinea, speaking about the promise that there is here, speaking also about the theme of regional integration that has been talked about so much during the course of the conference, this Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement that has been ratified recently, making the potential for Africa's largest free trade zone a reality. People speaking a lot about that. We've seen leaders from all across the world, different parts of the continent, business leaders coming through here to discuss how they can work together outside of the bank's statutory meetings. It's been an interesting experience here in Equatorial Guinea, seeing how people are coming from all parts of the world and having these kind of conversations. We'll be bringing you updates on exactly what's happened more in the financial reports. For now, it's back to you in studio.
That's a wrap from the team at 1. Of course, your news is going to continue, but after this, it's the weather with Mdudu.